Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. We are going to be covering 9.3 today, which is technology and the environment. So don't forget to take some notes and send me a picture. All right, so this is kind of the theme of this unit. It says that agriculture, industry, and trade led to changes in the environment, mainly deforestation, which is the cutting down of trees, usually to clear land for agriculture. Desertification, which is where you remove natural vegetation from a field in arid and semi-arid lands. But basically what it does is it creates desert-like conditions. And also pollution, which is mostly caused by industry, and it reduces our air quality. All right, so we're going to be looking at the causes and effects of environmental changes. So starting with the causes, one of the number one causes, or maybe the number one cause of environmental change is population growth. Because the world has experienced an increase in population since 1900, that means that we need to feed more people. So in 1900, we had 1.6 billion people. By 1950, we had 2.55 billion. And then by the year 2000, we had 6.12 billion. And so all these people with this rapidly growing population need more food. And so because they need more food, that means that more land is cleared for agriculture, which can result in deforestation, like we just said. Also soil erosion, and then it can also lead to a decline in habitats for some species of plants and animals. One of the effects of population growth is also overfishing. This is especially a threat in China, but overfishing has actually almost led to the disappearance of cod. And so this is a major issue. Water consumption is actually an issue as well. Clean water is a renewable resource, but with the growing population, if we consume it faster than it's able to renew, then that can be problematic. All right, urbanization. So this is another cause of environmental change, and this is the growth of cities. So people increasingly have moved to cities. Over the last, 150 years, the trend has been that people move from rural areas into cities. And as we learned in human geography last year, some of those people move out just outside of the city into suburbs. But some estimates say that by 2025, 5.1 billion of almost our 7 billion will live in cities. And so this puts pressure on people to grow more food, so more land to be cleared for more people living in the cities. Obviously, if you live in the city, you can't produce your own food there, so that has to be produced in a rural area. Also, people in cities tend to produce a lot of waste. And some of the waste that is produced actually contaminates the water that they're drinking. So that is a problem. All right, this connection between globalization and industry has also impacted the environment, especially as the manufacturing part of industry has shifted in large part from developed countries to developing countries. So like 60% of all the world's cotton textiles output comes from China, and about 30% comes from India. And so there's been this trend of manufacturing facilities moving from developed to developing countries, mainly because people in developing countries will work for cheap. And so this draws further on the resources that are available in those places. Another thing that this does is that this creates a rising middle class. So you have more people in developing countries who are able to find factory work. And as a result, it's creating middle classes in many of these developing countries. And those people are able to buy cars. And as they buy cars, this is not a bad thing. It's a good thing that they're able to now afford cars, but this leads to pollutants being released into the air. All right, so looking at the effects of environmental changes. We as humans have always used natural resources. We've used raw materials that are in the earth. But as industrialization spread after, especially after the second industrial revolution, combine that with our growing population, and this has caused a depletion of important resources. Petroleum began to be extracted en masse around 1850, and since around 1850, about half of these resources have been used up. So it's possible that within the next 30 to 40 years, we could use all of our Earth's petroleum. Humans are innovative though, and typically when something like that happens, or when we're faced with the depletion of a major resource like that, we're innovative. We will come up with something different, like solar power or wind power or whatever. Coal will last us a little bit longer. You can burn coal. This is how steam engines operate. So if petroleum runs out and we turn to coal, then about 60 years after that, we could deplete coal. But like I said, I wouldn't freak out too badly about that because humans generally are innovative. Think back to Thomas Malthus, who predicted that the world was going to run out of food. And while wheat growth went down, rice increased. So even in a heavily populated place like India, they had plenty of food, and his prediction did not come true. That's not to say we shouldn't take measures to protect the environment, but just saying, we are innovative. All right, so water scarcity is another concern that we're looking at. According to the UN, about 31 countries or more than 1 billion people lack clean, accessible drinking water. And so as the population increases, this becomes even more of an issue. Water scarcity is already an issue, but add in a population increase and it's even more of an issue. Another thing is that it's typically women and children who gather water in places where people actually have to gather it in buckets, and children who are gathering water can't go to school. And so this is kind of a bad trade-off, that they're basically trading access to clean water for their education. So another effect of environmental changes is changes in the atmosphere. And basically with the increase of industrialization, as things like factories have been built and automobiles and airplanes, railroads, things that emit pollutants into the air, as that has increased, so has pollution, especially the emission of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. And so basically these allow heat to enter the earth, so the heat of the sun can come into the earth as the ozone layer begins to deplete, but it also traps it from escaping the earth. And so it allows heat in, but it doesn't allow it out. And so this is why people are arguing for global warming. All right, the developing of renewable resources. This is a good effect of environmental changes. Because we are faced with the threat of depletion of petroleum and coal and things like that, it has caused nations, countries, companies to invest their money in the development of renewable energy. And so if you can run a factory or an automobile with wind power or solar power, ideally it would be cheaper. It's not right now, but maybe someday it will be cheaper, and we won't be using up coal and oil. And if we're not using coal and oil, then we're not releasing pollutants into the air. So this currently only makes up about 7% of the world's energy, but it is something that has been increasing. So one prediction is that by 2050, half of the world's electricity will come from wind and solar power. We shall see. All right, another good effect of these environmental changes is that people have become increasingly aware of the environment. A couple of these parties that have formed in order to promote global awareness is the Club of Rome, and this one was formed in 1968, consisting of politicians and factory owners and scientists, and they came together in Europe to promote solutions for global challenges. And so their main concern was that resource depletion, like oil and coal being depleted, would actually hurt economic growth. Green parties have formed in many countries. A green party is oftentimes a political party that will push for environmental issues. They will want regulations and tariffs and taxes and things like that to promote more environmentally friendly solutions to problems. And then the Greenbelt movement, this one specifically seeks to protect wilderness area from growing cities. All right, so global warming. This is a hotly debated topic. And depending where you find yourself on the political spectrum, you either believe that global warming is fact or fiction. I'm certainly not going to promote my beliefs here, but I will just kind of talk through what you need to know for this course. All right, so some people believe that the increase of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases is causing global temperatures to rise. And so people who believe this say that if we could somehow stop the emission of carbon dioxide, then the Earth's temperature would return to pre-industrial levels. And so that is the goal of people who advocate global warming. More recently, it's changed to climate change. That one is definitely harder to dispute. So some governments have actually put regulations in place to try to reduce their, quote, carbon footprint. And so this is simply the amount of carbon dioxide that each person uses. So when I get in my car and I drive to school or I drive, to the beach or whatever, I am releasing carbon into the air. And so some governments have tried to push for like solar powered vehicles, and they've put all sorts of regulations in place so people will have to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that they are releasing into the air. And that would cause a decrease in global warming. All right, so the Kyoto Protocol, which was signed in 1997, argued that developing nations should decrease their carbon dioxide output. So we said that most of the manufacturing and like the actual industrial process for many companies happens in developing countries like China and India. And so the Kyoto Protocol, which the United States helped work on, but the US Congress refused to ratify the treaty, was basically geared toward China and India being forced to reduce their carbon output. More recently, the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015 by 195 countries, including the United States. This is the one that Donald Trump said the U.S. would withdraw from. And so we are actually supposed to withdraw from the Paris Agreement in November of this year. We'll see what happens. But basically the goal of the Paris Agreement is to keep global temps low by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide, and funding climate resilient development. So looking for ways to produce automobiles and airplanes and factories that do not run on coal and oil, but instead run on like geothermal power or water power or, wind or solar power. Okay, so that is all for today. I hope you guys have a great day, and don't forget to send me a copy of your notes.